This is not how I thought this would happen. Seems like just yesterday that I killed that giant. Now I find myself running from a king who's acting like a tyrant. I remember the nation singing, Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s, and I thought he'd be proud of me, but instead, he's jealous of me. I just wanted to help, to defend my God and serve my king, but I don't understand why he keeps throwing spears at me. When my king was tormented and vexed with evil spirits, I played my harp and worshiped to soothe all those anxious feelings. I just want peace, and I want my king to feel peace, but with rage in his heart, all he does is keep chasing after me. This is not how I thought this would happen. I feel so alone, but I know that I'm not God. I know that you're with me, and I'm on the run with these warriors, with these mighty men, and they're loyal. They support me. They follow me. They believe in me. They will fight for me, and they will bleed for me. They trust me to win, trust me to fight, trust me to win every single night. With just one flick of my knife, I could end Saul's life, and my men are begging me to end this running tonight, but I can't, and I won't. They keep pushing me to take the throne. They keep telling me to be king is God's promise for me, that it is our home, and when I refuse to touch God's anointed, I could see the look in their eyes. They remind me that I've been anointed, that now is the time to rise. This is not how I thought this would happen. But as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because God, I know you're with me, and you'll prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies.
You ever found yourself in a situation where maybe that you were being mistreated a little bit? Maybe have you ever been in a season where there were some false accusations, some people were saying some things, wasn't really fair, wasn't really true. Your motives were being accused even though you were trying to do the right thing. Or maybe you've just been flat out betrayed. The people who were supposed to be in your corner, you feel like it's an uphill battle, and you can't win for even getting it right. You do the right thing, you continue to be the bigger person, you continue to take it on the cheek, and you find yourself going, what do I gotta do to get out of this? What do I gotta do to get this relationship right? Is it always gonna be this way? Well, if you find yourself in that situation, or you ever have, if you haven't, I have news for you, your time is coming. And if you have or you are, then this week is probably for you. David's time as a soldier has a lot to say to us about what do we do when we're treated unfairly, falsely accused, mistreated, our motives are misjudged or betrayed by the very people that are supposed to help us, that we can trust, are supposed to be in our corner. We're doing a series on David, and we're looking at the different aspects of his life. Last week, we looked at as a teenage boy, he was to be anointed, which means he was gonna be the next king of Israel. And he was serving as a shepherd. And we left off right here at this scene where he had just defeated the giant Goliath in 1 Samuel 16 and 17, threw the rock, cut off the head. And we learned last week that it is the pasture that prepares us for the palace. And so David is now in the story. He has just killed Goliath. Now, let me ask you this. Put yourself in David's shoes for a minute. If you had been anointed king and now you've killed the giant in front of everybody, how do you imagine your pathway to king going? Pretty easy, right? Like if I've been anointed and now I've killed a giant, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. They're gonna probably make me a captain or a general. I'll probably get close to the king. Nobody's gonna be more loyal to him than I am. We're gonna win some battles. I'm gonna help him build this great kingdom. We're gonna ride or die for life. And when he gets too old, he's gonna patch the torch. We'll have an honoring ceremony. He'll literally ride off into the sunset, and I'll build upon, and it'll be great. Maybe even, like him and his son and I will be boys or something. I don't know. Like, right? Like you would imagine, like this just makes too much sense. The job's right there. God set the table. The fact of the reality and the matter is that nothing could have been further from the truth. Here's what we know is that from the time that David killed Goliath to the time that he becomes king next week at age 30 was somewhere between 10 and 15 years. So there was 10 and 15 years in this setting, and we pick up the story. He has previously been a shepherd, and it's at this moment his position changes. And we're going to highlight kind of four areas, four times in his time, but I want to show you where he makes the transition. Last week we talked about David the shepherd. This week we're talking about David the soldier. And what does David the soldier have to say to us? I think he has a really bold invitation for a lot of us that could really, really help us on our path. 1 Samuel 18, this is the second verse. He has literally just killed Goliath, and you turn the page and the story picks up and says, from that day on, Saul kept David with him and didn't let him return to his family. We jump to verse 5 and it says, David went out wherever Saul would send him and he behaved wisely. He was a good leader. And Saul sent him over the men of war, and David was accepted in the sight of all the people and in the sight of Saul's servants. So from that day on, did David go back to the pasture to be a shepherd? He's a soldier. And who likes him? Everybody. The men love him. Saul's soldiers love him. The army loves him. He frees the nation. Like David was like annoyingly good at everything, right? Right, we already learned last week, he was handsome, he was ruddy, now he's brave, he's a great leader, he just goes first. Like, it's Mother's Day. David was the guy you moms, you want your daughter to end up with. Like, he just checked all the boxes, like did the right things for the right reasons. And so now we see David the soldier, and again, this should be the beginning of a beautiful kingdom and friendship, and nobody's gonna be better to him than Saul, but from the onset, we see that there's a problem, and it had nothing to do with David. It says, when the men were returning home after David killed the Philistine Goliath, the women came out of the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing and joyful songs with timbrels and lyres. This would have been processional, common in those days, that if you won a battle, the women would come and sing praises and celebrate. Verse 7 says, as they danced, the women sang, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. How do you think that set with the king? Well, if you're a good, secure leader that only wants what's best for everybody, you're stoked you got that guy on your team. If you're insecure, paranoid, and you've lost your eye on what's most important, that won't go well with you. Which one is Saul? Verse 8, Saul was angry. Well, there you go. And this refrain, this song greatly displeased him. They have credited David with tens of thousands, but me only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. And here begins David's entire time as a soldier. There was no one more fierce. There was no one with better integrity. There was no one with more loyal. And there was no one that Saul hated more. So what do you do when you're in that situation? When you literally are doing the right thing for the right reasons over and over, and there's nothing you can do. This is about to be David's story. We pick up the next day. In fact, there's one icon, there's one image that you could almost define David's tenure as a soldier. A lot happens. This happens throughout the rest of the book of 1 Samuel. If you want to go read it this week, I highly recommend it. It's wild. There's a lot of wild stuff that happens. We don't have time to cover, but I want to just hit 4 instances with Saul and David. And so here's the first one. It says the next day, this is the day after Goliath, the next day, an evil spirit from God. Okay, can we just push pause real quick? This is not rendered well, so you're gonna see that a couple times, the evil spirit from God. God will not bring an evil spirit on you, but he will allow an evil spirit to come on you when he takes his blessing off of you. Does that make sense? So that's what that means every time you see that. I don't wanna have to keep explaining it. Somebody's like, well, what if God gives me an evil spirit? No, he won't, but we can miss out on his blessing. So, the evil spirit, or God allowed a spirit to come forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house, and while David, remember what was his job? Play music, and what did it do for Saul? Calmed him down. Well, it used to calm him down. This time was different. It says, as he usually did, but this time Saul had a spear in his hand. And this one icon could be the defining icon of David's time as a soldier. Saul's sitting over there, literally freaking out, losing his mind. David's over here. The Lord is my shepherd. We win all the battles. I've killed 10,000. Now, he probably didn't say that in front of Saul. And it says that Saul hurled it, saying to himself, I will pin David to the wall. And what he meant was not, I'm going to get his shirt stuck on the wall. What he meant was, I'm going to end him. Watch this. It says, David eluded him twice. Saul's over there. David's only serving, only winning battles, only helping calm him down. And Saul takes his own spear and chucks it at David. David escapes. You want to talk about being mistreated? You want to talk about falsely accused? You want to talk about working for a tyrant, somebody paranoid? David knows what it's like. And what did David do? he escape. Right after this, Saul decides, I don't want you near me. And so he makes David a general. And so we see that David becomes like a pretty awesome general. Verse 12, we're in chapter 18 still. Saul was afraid of David because God was with David, but had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him, gave him command over 1,000 men. David led the troops in their campaigns, and everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw how successful he was afraid of David. But all of Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. David became a general, a captain, a leader, a warrior. And so now Saul has a problem. Saul hates David. He wants to get rid of David, but he can't kill David. Why? Everybody loves him, right? Everybody love me. Everybody love me. If you know, you know, right? That's David. I just thought of that. That's going to crush tomorrow. We should teach me how to Dougie. No, teach me how to David. Teach me how to David. I feel like we missed an opportunity. Where's our creative team? Everyone's fired. I love what happens here sometimes. I'm so gone. Where are we? So Saul wants to get rid of David, but he can't kill him. Why? Who does the nation love more, Saul or David? So if you're a king and you want to get rid of a dude and you can't kill him, what do? Just send him to the army. Tell him to go to the front lines. Well, guess what? David did. And guess what David did? Same thing Joshua did. All I do is win, win, win. Like that was what David did. And so now he has a new plan. He's like, so now Saul wants to bring him closer. And so Saul, one of Saul's daughters named Michal, she was in love with David, right? As many of the women probably were. And so Saul's like, hey, my daughter thinks you're pretty awesome. I would love to give her to you. He basically is like, I'm not worthy to be your son-in-law. He was so humble, but he was like, well, I mean, I guess that would be really cool. And then they make this really, really weird exchange. And so I got to ask you to help make sense of this. Anybody have a wedding and you got like a really weird wedding gift? Like a really, really weird one. Anybody? Like, I'm not going to ask. It's not show and tell. Nobody? I don't believe you guys, because I think every family has that person that thinks they knows better than the registry. Right? Like we've planned out our future. We know our colors. We know our apartment or our house. We know what we want from Target. We know what we want from Bed Bath & Beyond. But we all have that friend or that aunt or whatever that's like, you know what? I bet more than the plates that match the bowls from Target, they need a birdhouse homemade. Right? We all have that person. Like everybody's had like weird gifts that like you go through the keepsake box like 15 years and you're like, I forgot we got this. We've never used it. You throw it away and you just make sure the person you gave it like lives in a different city now because you don't want them to see it at Goodwill, right? David had like probably the weirdest arrangement of all time when it came to his wedding. So Saul's like, hey, I want to give him Michal, my daughter, but I can probably get him killed in the process because I'm going to tell him what my exchange is. And so he says, you want Michal? He said, tell David, here's the price. The king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins. Now, that's not one of those Bible words that means something different than you think it means. That means exactly what you think it means. 3,000 years ago, a little bit more barbaric. And so he's like, I need you to kill everybody and I need you to bring me some proof. These uncircumcised Philistines, only the Israelites were circumcised. Like, so after you kill them, I just need you to do one more thing. David's like, no problem. Listen, verse 26, when the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. So before the allotted time, this is the kind of guy David is, he took his men with him and went out and got 200 Philistines and brought back all their foreskins. You wanted 100, sir? Here's 200. I will not be expounding on that story at all. So he marries the king's son-in-law, but what was Saul's plan? If I send him to battle, I'll get him killed. If I send him to battle, I'll get him, keep sending him to battle, can't kill him. Makes him his son-in-law. So now Saul's not just his king, he's his father. In those days, he was his father. David has a problem. And the closer he gets to Saul and the better he does, he's not celebrated, but Saul becomes more hateful, more paranoid, more of a tyrant, and David has to actually end up fearing for his life. So now David is this unbelievable general. He's the foreskin warrior. Don't ever, you guys who just dedicated your children, don't ever like nickname that or name them that. This is a Bible, some of you are looking at me like I'm being gross. It's in the Bible. And he's now the son-in-law of the king. And now Saul has a bigger problem because he just can't get rid of this guy. And so we see the same thing play. And so now once again, they're in the king's chambers. Once again, an evil spirit is tormenting Saul. We're now in chapter 19. An evil spirit came from the Lord and came on Saul, and he was sitting in the house with a spear in his hand. And while David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. And that night, David made good on his escape. Now, this is where we really start to see the heart of David, and it took me a lot longer to kind of put myself in the shoes and figure this out than it should have. But I put myself in the scene, and I thought, man, David was really something. Because you got Saul sitting over here, paranoid. You got David sitting over here, playing the harp. And Saul slings the spear, and I imagine it's some sort of Neo Matrix move. But here's the reality. This has happened 2 or 3 times now. The spear's pinned to the wall. David's right here. Where's Saul? Over there. David's already been anointed king. He already has the prophecy that God's going to take out all of his enemies. How easy would it have been to have gone, well, it seems like now's my time. All he had to do was pull the spear out of the wall and take matters into his own hands. God's already anointed me. He already told me he was going to destroy all my enemies. Enemy number 1 right there. We know David was pretty good at throwing things, and he was a pretty good warrior. Wouldn't have taken 2 shots. But rather than David pick that spear up and throw it back, what did he do? He ran. Why? Because he was never going to take matters into his own hands. He wasn't going to manufacture or fast forward God's will for his life. And he was not going to let vengeance be something he did. He was going to leave vengeance up to God. And David has a lot to teach us as a soldier. And so now David's on the run. David spends probably what we think about 7 years. Literally, he's not even winning battles anymore. He's literally just running from Saul. Saul should have been building walls, building a city, and fighting Philistines, but he's taking all of the army's resources, energy, and soldiers, and he's chasing David. Meanwhile, David's running for his life, and he finds himself like the OG Robin Hood, basically. He finds himself in the middle of a really interesting group of people. It says, if we jump to chapter 22, it says, David's on the run. He's in the desert. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. Well, that's quite the group of people. He used to lead the armies, and now he's like, yeah, it's like Robin Hood's merry men, like distress, in debt, and discontented, right? He's like, well, guys, anybody else here like had down on their luck? Like, I guess I'm your captain now. Let's go. Where are we going to go? I know. Who's chasing you? Who's chasing you? Let's go this way. That's what he did for 7 years. But you know what? I put this out here because last week at the end of the message, we made a connection from David to Jesus, who 14 generations later, Jesus came from the line of David. And I read that, and I thought, man, that reminds me a lot of the type of people Jesus found himself around. Discontent and in debt and distress. 14 generations later, a line of David would come as the Messiah, Jesus. And you know who he intentionally surrounded himself with? Those guys, us. And he's like, hey, everybody else has cast you out, but I'll lead you. I'll lead you into freedom. I just thought that was cool. And it's the kind of guys he has with him. So now they're on the run. And 2 more stories. Let me take you there. And then I want to show you what was going on in David's heart during this. So now he's already had spears thrown at him. He's on the run. He's not a captain. He's not with Michal. She gets married to somebody else. He's lost everything. He's only loyal. He's only loving God. And meanwhile, he's still writing poems and psalms, but he's not writing psalms anymore about being a shepherd. You know what he's writing about? Being on the run and trusting God and God's mercy. Because why? His season changed. See, when your season changes, your prayers change. But when your seasons change, God doesn't change. And so he never stopped running after the one who he knew he could count on. And so now he's finding himself running. He's not in the palace. He's literally in the desert. And we pick up the story in chapter 23 at a place called En-Gedi. Verse 29, David went up there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. Now this is really cool for me. Go ahead and take the scripture off, show the picture. This is En-Gedi behind me. Down below, there's like a pathway, and those giant holes are called the crags, and they're actually caves where crazy people, wild animals, outlaws would live in. They're big enough to house people. And this is where it was. Now, when we went to Israel last year, we got to be here. We saw this. We did a devotional. I'll show you a picture in a minute, right here at the bottom of this. And so I've been to En-Gedi, and you can see these holes, and you can see this is where the band of outlaws and the wild animals would hide out. And David is given a third opportunity to take matters into his own hands. And again, I'm a dad of a 3-year-old, so this works well too. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in En-Gedi. And so he took 3,000 able young men from all of Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. That's En-Gedi. He came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there, and Saul went into the cave to relieve himself. If you read that in the King James Version, it says, to covereth his feet. If you don't understand what you're reading, Saul had to go poo-poo, as we say in my house. He had been running and chasing so long, Paul had to take a dump, drop a deuce, whatever you want to say. And he was a man of dignity, so he's like, I'm not just gonna do it here. He's like, I'm gonna go up in the cave where the animals are. And so Saul walks into the cave to do his business, like where it was. And so this is literally, the Bible put it in here, like, even King, I bought my nephew a book once called Everybody Poops. Apparently everybody does poop. So it says he's now taking a poop. So he's down, he's relieving himself, covering his feet, whatever. I'm curious what the message in the passage in the Amplified translation, how they put this. But I mean, if you know those versions, that's really funny. Here's what Saul didn't know. While he was doing squatty potty, David and his men, back to the Bible, were in the far back of the same cave. Now that's a way to go. How'd you get to heaven? Ate too much pork, had to run into a cave. Next thing I know, I'm here. Saul's deucing. David and his men are in the back of the cave. Would have been just like this. Listen to the hearts of the men. Listen to this. David was awesome. The men said to David, David, this is the day that the Lord spoke of when he said, I'll give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. So David crept up and unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Dude, David was like stealth mode. Either that or Saul's really loud. Either way, like David was able to get close enough. Don't look around when I say that. David was able to get close enough to cut off a corner of his, like he cuts off part of his clothes while he's dropping a deuce. Saul finishes his business, goes back down. Watch this is crazy. And afterwards, David became conscience-stricken for cutting off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master. He is the Lord's anointed. I will not lay a hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his own way. They heard him, they saw him, they smelled him, and Saul was out. Then David went out of the cave and said to Saul, my Lord, my king. That was a good one. No, he didn't say that. I put that in. My Lord, my king. When Saul looked up behind him, David bowed and prostrate, humbled himself to the very king and son and father-in-law that was trying to kill him. He said to Saul, why do you listen to these men that David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands. I was in the back of that cave. Some of my men told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of robe in my hand. I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. David at this point is like, you've thrown spears at me. I've won battles for you. I've killed giants for you. I've sung songs for you. I literally could have killed you while you were doing your business. I have some of your clothes. What do I have to do to show you? How many times do I have to how many of us, this is where we're at. How many times do I have to get it right and do the right thing before God will see me, reward me, vindicate me? What do I got to do? And Saul in that moment was broken, said he'd never heard him again, and changed his mind the next day. But we also know what was going on in David's heart, because if you read the Psalms, sometimes they tell us what was happening when in history. And if you have an NIV Bible, if you look at Psalm 57, it said of David when he was hiding in a cave. And I want to show you the types of prayers and songs David was singing in his heart while year after year, month after month, desert after desert, cave after cave, he's on the run. I want you to listen to what's in his heart. Psalm 57 says this. Have mercy on me, my God. Have mercy on me. For in you I take refuge. Does that sound like somebody who's carving out his own path? Does that sound like somebody who's doing it his own way? Does that sound like somebody who's trusting his own ability to be a warrior, king, leader? In you and you alone I trust and I take refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out, O Most High God, who vindicates me. He sends me from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends forth his love and his faithfulness. I'm in the midst of the lions. I'm forced to dwell among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Yet be exalted, O God, above the heavens, and let your glory be over all the earth. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit for my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. But my heart, O God, my heart is steadfast. So I will sing and make music. Awake, my soul. Awake, harp, lyre. I will awake in the dawn. I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations. I will sing for you among the peoples. For great is your love, reaching to the heavens, and your faithfulness reaches to the sky. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm David, and I've been doing this thing the right way all these years, and I have a moment in a cave to write another song, and everything is not going, and how am I still here, and when am I getting out of this, and what do I gotta do? I don't know that I would have the type of character. I don't know that the first words onto the paper for me would be, for great is your love, reaching to the heavens, your faithfulness reaches to the skies. I think my psalm would be, what the heck? But David had this uncanny, fierce trust in God that as many times, literally his life handed him the opportunity to grab the bull by the horns. He refused to grab the bull by the horns. And he heeded the words his son would write someday. I'm gonna trust the Lord with all my heart. I'm not gonna go with what makes sense to me. Lead me not in my understanding. In all my ways, I'm gonna acknowledge you. And only you and you only can make my path straight. You will guide my path. I know what I'm entitled to. I know what I'm anointed to do. I know what my men said, but God, you are faithful. You are the one. You are to be exalted above the heavens. And then one final moment. That was 3, and David gets a 4th opportunity. I just want to show you, skip down to 1 Samuel 26, and we're about to meet the spear again. David once again is on the run because Saul broke his promise once again. He's wasting all of the nation's resources, chasing down his best captain and son-in-law who loves him and is loyal and has more integrity than anybody in the nation. Makes sense. And so now they're in the desert of Ziph. Saul is hunting David, and they're in the desert, and David has Abishai, one of his captives with him. It says 3,000 select troops went there searching for David. Saul made his camp beside the road of the hill of Hakilah, facing Jeshimon, and David stayed in the wilderness. And they saw that David was camping, and so David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep at the camp with his what? Spear stuck straight in the ground near his head. And Abner and his soldiers were laying all around him. So here's the scene. Saul and his army are out. Abner, his captain, is out. Saul's asleep, and right next to him is his spear, inches away. And David sneaks up once again. And all he had to do was this. And he's king. And they celebrate. And they follow. And they live happily ever after. He could finally end the torment. He could finally retire from the job. He could finally get out from underneath that whatever. And Abishai said, here's your chance. Today, God's delivered your enemy in your hands. Let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't need to strike him twice. David said to Abishai, don't touch him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, he, the Lord himself, will strike him, or his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But God forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and the jug that are near his head, and let's go. And so it closes out. They took the spear, they took the jug. They waited in the morning till they woke up. Once again, he's just right outside the camp. He's like, hey, Saul, this yours? This is yours too, right? The new Stanley Cup? You got a new one? We snuck in last night. Abishai wanted me to kill you. Like all my men, like the whole nation. But I know better. It's not my time. I'm not going to lay a hand on you. I took your spear and I took your jug just so you know I was there. I'm never going to harm you. If you do this for 30, 40 more years, my trust and my hope is in God. He's going to deliver me. He's going to sustain me. He's my shepherd. And what did he tell Abishai? He's either going to die or die in battle or get old, but I refuse to take it into my own hands. And here's what David knew. I believe one of the things we can take away from David, I want to give you a couple thoughts, is when you know what you're calling, when you know your identity, when you know that you are anointed, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. But the haters and the naysayers and all I mean is, and this and that. And God knows. You know what your calling is. You know what your identity is. You don't need to worry about it. As we heard in the spoken word, this is not how this was supposed to go. When we were in Israel last year, we were right outside of En-Gedi. You can go ahead and show the picture of us. And Pastor Cindy led us in a Devo, and it was one of the Psalms that David could have written in this season of his life. And I just want to share with you what she shared with us. I want to bring a little bit of Israel home, but there's also 4 things that David can teach us in this Psalm, and they're the 4 things that we see from David. How do we endure the soldier season? The pasture, man, it's like sometimes when you're in the pasture, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just throwing rocks, it's boring. You're like, how could it get any worse? Well, it get worse. Try the soldier. And so here we are, and here's what Pastor Cindy shared with us. Psalms 25, verses 1 through 5. Here's what David said. And here's also, how do we respond to false accusations? How do we respond to betrayal? How do we respond to things not going the way they're supposed to? How do we respond to being treated unfairly? Do we take action? Do we blow them up on Facebook? Or do we do what David said in Psalm 25? In you, O Lord, my God, I put my trust. Somebody say trust. I trust in you. He repeats it. I trust in you. So don't let me be put to shame because I trust in you. Don't let my enemies triumph over me. No one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame, but shame will come on those who are treacherous without cause. So God, show me your ways. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. What do we learn from David as a soldier? I believe there's an invitation for us. And I think if David could show up at the end of this season, or he could say one thing about what can I teach you about my time as a soldier, he would say, you know, my time was defined by this right here. This got thrown at me. I could have killed David. I could have killed Saul with this a bunch of times. But if I could tell all of you that are betrayed, mistreated in a season, going, this is not how it should go, this is what I believe David would say. Put the spear down. Just set it down. Trust God. See, I think that spear represents offense. That spear represents retribution. That spear represents me carving out my own path. This spear represents me doing it my own way. The spear represents trusting in my ability, listening to what my men in the cave are saying. Go now, do it, take it. God wouldn't have brought you this far. And David is saying, none of that is right. Put the spear down. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Trust in me. And so in this psalm, I believe there's 4 just simple, brief, short takeaways that are the same takeaways we see as David as a soldier. How do we deal with these situations? First of all, some of you, this is really going to help you. It's hard, but it's simple. You have to put your trust in God, not man. You have to put your trust in God, not man. And sometimes we trust men. We trust our bosses. We trust our leaders. We trust our friends. Do you know the man that most of us trust far too often? Ourselves. My ability, my acumen, my degree, my grind, my grit, and God says, that's cool, I gave you that, but trust me. Use that, but trust me. Another way we put the spear down, and this is probably the hardest one. Wait. It's like pains me to say that word. Wait. Wait on what? Wait on the Lord for his timing and to fulfill his promises. Do you know there's tons of stories in the Bible where God made a promise and then they went and made it happen on their own and ruined the whole plan? Starting with Father Abraham. God made a promise, and it's like the minute we get the calling, the minute we get the word, the minute we get the process, the promise, we're like, let's go get it! God's like, see, I knew I can't trust you with anything. If I'm telling you I have something for you, don't you think I have a path? Will you trust me? Will you wait on me to fulfill it my way? Don't trust your ways, trust mine. And the way you do that is the third one. You see, he says in verse 5, and my hope is in you all day long. Number 3, we see hope in God. Now that word hope, I know you're like, well, you just said trust in God. And it's not trust, and it's not, well, I hope. That word hope in this language has this context of being like chained to or tethered to someone. So when you hope in God, you're tethered to God. What does that mean? When he moves, you move. When he stops, I stop. When he takes 2 steps back, I take 2 steps back. When we pause and wait and wait and wait and wait, that means I pause and wait and wait and wait. When he says jump, I jump. I'm tethered to him. I hope in him. How do I hope in him? I'm tethered to him, and that's going to help me trust him, and it's going to help me wait. And those are the 3 kind of takeaways from Psalm 25. And I'm just going to add one of my own that I think, because I know what happens to us when we get tired of waiting and we get spears thrown at us and insults hurled and we're mentioned in stuff and we know what's being said and we're being mistreated and it's not fair. And what I do, and you know what happens? We get angry and we get bitter and we get hurt. And do you know what hurt people do? They hurt people. So the other way we got to handle this is don't stop being good to people. Don't get bitter. Don't get hurt. Don't stay hurt. Well, how do I do that? You stay tethered to the one who heals. You stay tethered to the one who waits. You stay tethered to the one that you can trust. You stay tethered to the one who's already marked out all your days are numbered. He's got the path carved out. And some of you, I just believe there's so many people here this weekend that as simple as this is, what God has been trying to say to you for a while is like, just set the spear down. Your way, your plan, your offense, your vengeance, your bitterness, just set the spear down and let's get back to tethering and trusting. And I believe that's so many of us. And so that's the takeaway. What do we learn from David? Set the spear down. Trust him. Stick to him. And when you stick to him, waiting gets a little bit easier. And you'll say things like, I'll worship you all the days long, as many as the skies are. I will sing the praises. Because you anointed me, you called me, you'll never leave me or forsake me. And I just think that's I'm not gonna ask for a show of hands, but I believe there's a lot of us that you hear God saying that to you. Can I have the spear? Can I have it? Don't throw it back. Trust me, trust me. It's really hard to trust somebody you don't have a relationship with. And so for some of you, that may start with not just a concept, but you giving God your life. I'm gonna say a quick prayer to close now. But if you're ready to make a decision, be like, man, I want to trust. You can't just trust him with some of it. You got to trust him with all of it. If you are here and you're like, man, I need to give God my life. I need this. What I've been doing hasn't been working. We've made it so easy to connect with us. I'm going to say a prayer, and that prayer is going to invite us to give our lives to Jesus. And if you're ready to make that decision, we just want to help you on that journey. We won't overwhelm you. We would just love for you, whether you're online or in person, just to text KPS to 94000. And then I'm done praying. I'm going to dismiss. And if you need prayer for anything, we have a ministry team in our prayer room. We also have one online. We'd love to pray with you. But the question for us this week is, in your own life, in your own story, in your own season, is there a spear that God's asking you to lay down? Will you bow your heads with me? Heavenly Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the life of David. I thank you that even when you know you're going to say hard things to us, you've given us examples. And God, we know we can't do this on our own. And so, Father, I pray for anybody who has a plan, an offense, revenge, is tired, burned out, whatever it is, God, even if it's just, they just want to sit and be hurt and angry for a while, God, I pray that you would just give us the power, give us the strength to set the spear down, to give it back to you. God, I pray that you'd fill us with your spirit, that you would remind us to stick to you, to tether to you, that you would refresh and energize anyone who's tired and burned out. And God, for anybody who has just gotten to the end of their rope in their life and like, man, my way hasn't worked. I just believe right now in their hearts they're saying, I am choosing to give God my life. I pray that God, you would transform them, that you would adopt them, that they would understand that Jesus came, hung out with a bunch of discontented, deaded people, and died and gave his life so that we could have eternal life. And God, I pray that if there's somebody here who's never made that decision to put their life in your hands, that they wouldn't leave their screen or this room without making that decision. We thank you, God, that you can plan a better life, that you can be trusted better than anything we could come up with, even when it's difficult. So help us not just to hear it, but live it out. In Jesus' name, amen.